Racism in South Korea, however, that's nothing new, but apparently foreigners are more likely to contract and spread COVID-19. That's all coming up right now. What's up, guys? Fooch from Fooch TV. So this story actually begins about a month ago in Gyeonggi-do, and for those that don't know, Gyeonggi-do is the area that surrounds Seoul. Around the end of February / beginning of March, a whole bunch of foreigners living in the Gyeonggi-do area were contracting the COVID-19 virus. Now, it should be noted that a lot of these workers contracting the virus were actually factory workers. Now, it seems to me this was as a result of the Korean factory workers either not providing good working conditions for the migrant workers or the Korean factory owners not following the COVID restrictions, which would not surprise me considering migrant workers who move to another country, not just Korea, migrant workers who work in another country, they are usually subjected to poor working conditions. Now, instead of doing the rational thing and investigating the factories and going after the factory owners, this turned into a blame foreigners campaign. Now, at first, they were testing all foreigners who were located in these smaller cities and advising large communities such as churches and other gatherings that had a whole bunch of foreigners attend. They suggested to urge the foreigners in those communities to get tested as well. Things started heating up in Seoul on March 5th when the city government, which I might add, does not yet have an elected mayor. There's still a sitting mayor because the previous mayor had committed suicide. Those mayor elections are coming up in just a couple of weeks, but the Seoul city government started urging all foreigners in Seoul to get tested as well. However, this was just a suggestion. Fortunately, on March 7th in the Gyeonggi-do area, the government finally got a sense of reason and started investigating those factories. However, unfortunately, that reason did a complete 180 and spontaneously combusted as it was getting pulled into a black hole, because on March 8th, the Gyeonggi-do province issued a mandate saying that all foreigners, yes, all 85,000 foreigners that work in Gyeonggi-do and live in Gyeonggi-do, they must get tested. So even if you live in Seoul and work in Gyeonggi-do, you must get tested. Or if you just worked, or if you just lived in Gyeonggi-do, or if you worked and lived and worked in Gyeonggi-do, you would still need to get tested. So that started on March 8th, and the timeline was March 8th to the 22nd to get tested. And if you do not get tested, you may be subjected to a fine of about 2 million won, which is about $1,800. And if you eventually contracted the virus, all of the things that the government would normally do for free, such as transport you to a facility and let you stay there for 2 weeks and feed you, if you didn't get that test and eventually you got infected, you would be responsible for all costs related to your infection. And that's all thanks to this lying scumbag, the current governor of the Gyeonggi-do province, Lee Jae-myung, who also happens to be a part of Korea's Democratic Party, Minjudang. I particularly like his provincial policy, which states a fair society. Well, that only seems to be part of his policy, the full policy being a fair society for Koreans while foreigners can burn in hell. And that may also not be right. Maybe it's more of, a fair society for my friends and people who give me money and people who support my campaign and who have ambitions that align together with me and who support my goals and ambitions, while everyone, foreigners and Koreans who don't do that, they can all burn in hell. Now, the good news is that they opened many test facilities so people can go in without waiting to get tested, and so large groups of people wouldn't have to come together to wait in line, congregating together. The same type of people that the government thinks are dirty and are spreading the virus, they wouldn't have to come together and congregating, which the Korean government has worked long and hard to prevent people from doing, which has caused many business owners to go bankrupt. The bad news is that was actually a lie, and this shit show occurred. Hundreds, if not thousands of people had to line up in close proximity to each other in order to get their tests done, most of which being, factory workers and also other types of workers who are busy during the week, meaning they had to give up their valuable free time on the weekends in order to get this test done by March 22nd. Now I know what you're thinking, well, if they created this sort of policy, they must have also had Koreans who work at companies with other foreigners to get tested as well, or that the government would have also enforced testing to churches and cults, which are the main reasons why the virus spread so much in the country. And the answer to that question is no. The Korean Democratic Party did not require Korean workers who work at a company with foreigners or the churches or the cults to get tested as well, even though the churches and cults are the main ones to blame. And I'm not even blaming them, but if you were to blame one group of people, it would be the churches and cults meeting together. Remember Shicheonji, that cult which started the entire spread of the virus in Daegu last year. There was no mandatory testing done for them, and that's because Minju-dong and Lee Jae-myung know how to play politics, and they are shifting the blame from these groups of people to foreigners. Now, the reason for this is actually many foreigners do not have voting rights in Korea. In order to get voting rights, you have to be a permanent resident, which most foreigners do not have in Korea. And even then, you can only vote after a couple of years of having that permanent residency. And even then, you're not allowed to vote in presidential elections, which means that they do not need to worry at all about foreign voters, which means they could throw foreigners under the bus whenever it's convenient and blame them as long as they don't piss off their main voting bloc, which is older people and religious people. I should also note that CEOs of companies that employ foreigners also have to get tested, which doesn't really make any sense, and it seems like the only reason they might be doing that is to punish CEOs for hiring foreigners instead of local Koreans to work there. Now, it turns out stupidity is actually more contagious than the virus itself, and on March 16th, it spread to Seoul because Seoul enacted the exact same mandate for the close to 400,000 foreign residents living in the city. They would have to get tested before the end of the month or possibly face a 2 million won fine, in addition to having to pay all costs related to contracting the virus if they do so in the future. And I'd like to point out again that Seoul does not currently have an elected mayor. This is a sitting mayor, which means that I think this is an abuse of power. Now, when governments and politicians target migrant workers and blame them for something that's not their fault, yes, it's absolutely terrible and it's racist. However, if the victims are usually just migrant workers, then nothing really happens about it. However, Seoul is a little bit different. Not only does Seoul have a lot more people living in it than Gyeonggi-do does, it also has a lot more wealthier foreigners living in it. And when you start forcing these racist, xenophobic policies on wealthy people, well, shit's gonna hit the fan, and fortunately it did. Businesses and foreign governments started pushing back on the government, and finally the Korean federal government stepped in and advised Seoul and Gyeonggi-do to stop these testing procedures, which is something I'm sure they really want them to stop, especially considering, as I mentioned, there's a mayor election coming up in about a week or two, and the Democratic Party definitely wants to win that election, both for the Seoul city mayor and the Busan city mayor. And then next year we have a presidential election, which of course, who wouldn't want to win? And if this became a massive international incident, it would bring a whole bunch of shame to Korea, which would definitely hurt their chances of winning those elections. Now, fortunately, at this point in time, reason finally kicked in, and on March 19th, Seoul retracted their statement saying that all foreigners must get tested and changed it to "we highly encourage foreigners to get tested. That was only about 3 days after the initial mandate went out. Now, because the deadline for the Gyeonggi-do testing was March 22nd, which we have just passed, I don't think they rescinded that mandate. However, I wouldn't be surprised if they did not fine any foreigner who did not get the test done by the deadline. And I should note that Gyeonggi-do was also trying to implement a new mandate that stated any foreign worker applying for a job, if they did get that job, in order to actually start working, they would have to provide a negative test. Now, that kind of mandate would kind of make sense if it was across the board, if Koreans and foreigners also had to get a negative test before starting their new job. But that mandate was only for foreigners getting a new job. But since the backlash happened, Gyeonggi-do has seemed to rescind that mandate, which did not actually go into effect. Now, besides being a foreigner who would have had to get the test, even though I probably would have protested and, taken the risk of not getting it or getting the test and also making a stink about getting it, there were a couple things about this that kind of pissed me off. The first thing is, as you know by my video, sometimes I say controversial things that some people don't agree with. However, I would like to believe the reasons why I came to those controversial ideas, how I got to those conclusions, is through logic that makes sense, and I try to be as consistent as possible. Also noting, if I do say something and someone makes a valid point, I'm willing to change my mind. But in no way does this policy to test foreigners only make sense at all. Foreigners are not more likely to contract COVID, of course. 2, the number of foreign COVID patients before these minor outbreaks in Gyeonggi-do was a fraction of how many Koreans had contracted the virus. And 3, what about the major groups contracting the virus, such as the churches and the call centers and the cults? Why did, if we're going to say, dangerous places would require everyone to get tested, why didn't we test the church members? Why didn't we test the cult members? Why didn't we test everyone working in every call center in Seoul? Why didn't we test everyone when we had the club outbreak? Anyone who goes to the club needs to get tested. Why don't we test Koreans that work with foreigners, considering they could also possibly have the virus if they're working close to the foreigners that spread the virus so easily or contract it so easily? And that's because they're more concerned about shifting the blame and doing what politicians, especially the Korean Democratic Party, does best, which is shifting the blame and trying to cover up other stories as well. Maybe they were trying to cover up the massive scandal involving the insider trading or insider buying of land through a government agency, when buying property is extremely expensive and very controversial in Korea, housing prices and land prices. Yet this company that was closely linked to people in the Democratic Party, they were buying land in areas that were not yet announced to be new government developments, but ended up being government developments. Maybe they wanted to cover up that story by having this story. Maybe they're just racist and they just wanted to have a public enemy. Whatever the reason, it's inconsistent and it doesn't make any sense. And that's why it pisses me off so much. If the current ruling party was racist and they said, hey, you know what, guys? We're racist. We hate foreigners. We don't want you guys living here. But if you're going to live here, you're going to have to deal with whatever rule that we make. Yeah, that would suck, but at least they would be telling the truth and at least they would be consistent with what they're saying. But this Democratic Party, similar to in the US, they spread all of these lies. No, we want an equal society for everyone. We want peace and equality for everyone. We want a fair society. They go ahead and promote this society, this fair society, and then they turn around and then they start blaming foreigners, or they start blaming these minority groups, whatever they can use as a scapegoat to escape whatever political turmoil they're in, or in order to create a public enemy to shift people to. This was racist, and it gave people the false idea that foreigners are to blame or foreigners are more risky for spreading the virus, which is not true. Lastly, the thing that pissed me off was, if you saw my video from a few weeks ago and you remember that BTS incident where the German DJ said that BTS is like a virus, a hateful statement just attacking BTS for being a boy band. Has nothing to do with racism at all. Everyone in the West got their arms up. They threw their arms up. Oh, this is terrible. You know, he said BTS is a virus and COVID is a virus and COVID came from China and, you know, China's in Asia and BTS came from Korea and Korea is in Asia. So that must mean that he said that, you know, BTS is like COVID and that's racist. No, that is not true. He said that they were a virus because he just didn't like them. It wasn't a racist statement, but all the social justice warriors had to come out and say, oh no, this is racist, and all the virtue signaling and all this crap, and the BTS fans, oh no, this is racist. And just a few weeks later, I love the irony, just a few weeks later, BTS's country, their home country, Korea, comes out and does something that's actually racist towards foreigners. You can't make this up. You can't make this up. And where are they now? Where are the social justice warriors that were upset about the German DJ? Where are you now? Why aren't you complaining about the Korean Democratic Party? Where are you? Where's your hate? Where's your posters on social media saying how disgusted you are? Where are the BTS fans? BTS is all for, you know, if you're going to use BTS groups to promote equality, where are my BTS fans out? Where are you guys? Are you guys attacking the Korean Democratic Party? Where are you? No, you're remaining silent because you're full of crap and you know it. The German DJ wasn't racist. The Korean Democratic Party is racist. And, you know, as you can tell, I'm pissed off. I've worked myself up about this because it's inconsistent, just like all the other crap that's going on. There you have it. I've said my 2 cents, maybe that was more of like 3 cents on the matter. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Was this racist? How do you think the Korean government should deal with it now? Should they apologize? Do you think it's not racist? Whatever you guys think, I want to hear. Leave me a comment below. As always, if you liked this video, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. If you hated the video, give it a thumbs down, unsubscribe, report it to the Korean government to get me deported. Do whatever you have to do. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you guys next time.